LinkedIn News.
The longer you live on this planet, the one thing you start to realize is that titles make for very poor traveling companions. At every pivot, at every left turn, right turn, there's always this nagging feeling, well, if I can just get this position, if I could just become VP of marketing, if I could just become head coach, just become X, then all of my worries will go away. And as the great philosopher, the notorious B.I.G. said, more money, more problems.
Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better, a self-improvement podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts to learn how we can improve ourselves, our relationship to others, and the world around us. Before we dive into today's episode, I have an ask of you. Myself and my team would love to hear what you think of our show and what would make it even more valuable for you in 2024. So if you're open to taking just a couple of minutes, we'd love for you to take our anonymous listener survey at www.linkedin.com/everydaybetter. That's www.linkedin.com/everydaybetter. All right, on to the episode. This week, I sat down with Daron K. Roberts. He's a former NFL and college coach. Now, Daron caught my attention because I was wondering, how does a Harvard Law School grad end up coaching football? You'll hear more about the how in the episode, so I won't spoil the fun. But Daron ended up serving coaching stints with the Kansas City Chiefs, the Detroit Lions, the West Virginia Mountaineers, and the Cleveland Browns. Through the center he founded, Roberts teaches a course called A Game Plan for Winning at Life. His research and the context for the class revolve around issues of rejection, failure management, student-athlete financial literacy, and leadership. And his students learn by doing, so they get real-life assignments to face rejection, like going to Starbucks and asking for a free drink, or dealing with hardship by having a conversation with someone they care about that they know is going to be tough. He also teaches vulnerability. And ultimately, he is leading them to become the leaders of their own lives. Daron is seriously a wealth of knowledge and great metaphors, as you'll hear. We talked a lot about what it looks like to wage war against the status quo, one of my favorite Daronisms from the conversation, but also how we can all be creators and why that serves the greater good, and when we need to stop asking for permission and just start giving notification. His work is about waking up, embracing discomfort, and staying in the deep end just a little bit longer for the sake of what you want. Enjoy. Daron, I was really intrigued by your story around getting into the NFL, and I wonder if you can just share that before we jump into anything else.
Yes, absolutely. So since the age of 7, I had a dream of becoming governor of Texas. And this is something that I thought I was going to go into politics. My parents were involved in politics in East Texas with the local NAACP chapter. And I go to undergrad, check the boxes, student body president. University of Texas was the largest university in the US. Check the box, take the LSAT. So I'm going to go to law school, apply to Harvard Law School. And I don't get accepted. I don't get rejected. I get waitlisted. And the letter said something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing, we like you. We unfortunately like so many more people more than we like you. And so unless all of those people turn us down, we may reach back out to you. But if you have any other options for law school, then we highly advise you to take them. So this is how you land on the wait list, right? I take a job with Senator Joe Lieberman for 2 years in DC. Don't want to be there, but I'm there during September the 11th, and I get this front row seat to governance that I could never have imagined or forecasted. And, one of the things we're going to be talking about is this nonlinear life. And what do you do when you walk into a cul-de-sac? And I think one of the big takeaways for me is you glean and soak up as much as you can. And all of those lessons tend to add value and help you during the next part of your journey. So I go to the Kennedy School. I'm still reapplying to Harvard Law School. I get waitlisted 4 times, finally get in, start law school in 2004. I'm doing the law school thing, which is study, read, take exams, work at law firms during the summer. And my last summer of law school, one of my high school buddies whom I played football with asked me to go to a football camp with him at the University of South Carolina. I go, the head coach asks for a volunteer, and I say yes. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know anything about how to coach football. I had played in high school, didn't play in college, but I had the best 3 days of my life working with 66th graders at the University of South Carolina, figuring it out by watching YouTube videos of Deion Sanders and buying a whistle and a bucket hat and sunglasses. But I noticed it was the first time in my life that I did not have to set my alarm clock to get up. And this is something for folks listening. I think it's very rare that we sit with our emotions and we sit with the things that move us. We kind of notice it, but then we go on to the next calendar entry. And I really sat with that feeling of, I don't know what it is about coaching, but this is something I need to do sooner rather than later. I wrote a letter to every team in the NFL. There are 32 of them, received 31 rejections. Herm Edwards, Kansas City Chiefs, calls me on April the 13th, 2007 and says, don't know why you want to do this. Happened to read your letter. I've got a training camp internship for you. No pay, no benefits, 18-hour days, and you need to get here as soon as you graduate. So I said, sign me up. Graduate June 7th, '07. Celebrate with my family. Took my diploma from Dean and Lana Kagan, handed it to my parents and told them to take it back home for safekeeping, and drove my 2002 Tahoe from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Kansas City, Missouri, and started my career as a training camp intern. And so that's how it began.
I love that you talk about sitting with the feeling. What was the feeling?
Sport by no means is a panacea, and I think that oftentimes we glorify what it means to be in a competitive landscape with teammates as sort of this magical space where everyone emerges as a better human and as a leader. And there are some real difficulties with sport. I think one of the things that's really difficult is that sport is usually the canary that gives society an indication of where we really are on issues, whether it's gender or sexual orientation or race. It is through the lens of sport, and we can think about Muhammad Ali and Billie Jean King and Naomi Osaka, Colin Kaepernick, obviously. This is where we find out where we are as a society. And so I just felt while I was coaching these young men who were they were from every SES level. They were from suburbs and small towns and urban centers, different races, religions. But there are these very brief moments, and I'm speaking in the football context, but there are these very brief moments on a football field where race, SES, where your parents shop for groceries, all of that flies out the window, and you have 11 guys trying to execute a play. And I think it was seeing that up front and close, it triggered something that I felt when I was a high school football player, and I just had this nagging feeling that I needed to be a part of that narrative.
I've played some team sports,
Yeah.
but truly I've been a runner, so I haven't been, deeply in that space of being on a team, but I somehow also know exactly what you're talking about, and it's something I've thought about when I watch football. I've grown up watching football. The one word that comes to mind for me is hope when you start talking about that. Is that what it felt like? What was it like to see that? You said it triggered a feeling, like what was it?
In many ways, there was something very authentic and genuine and raw about the interactions that I both watched between football players and the ones that I was engendering with the young men that I was teaching and coaching. There are conversations, and this isn't during the confines of a four-quarter game, but while you're on the sidelines or in the locker room or walking back to the dorms, there are these settings in which I think people who would not get together are in very close proximity, and they're forced to find a way to bridge gaps. And that was special to me. And I knew there was something in me that said, don't turn this into, oh, I'll coach after I retire, bring this into the present tense and do this now.
So you have this weekend that totally shifts what you're thinking about in your life. And you go back to your family and your friends, and you're like, all right, just kidding about this whole direction of becoming, a state politician and, having this title and this position. What happens?
I talked to my parents, and I was 26 at the time. So when I called them, I wasn't calling them for permission, and I recited this conversation with them. This was more of a notification, right? And I thought I at least owed it to them to give them sort of a sense of where I was. And they pushed back a bit because, and this is a point that I really want to get across. I think the dominant thought among those of us who have college degrees or advanced degrees is that you spend all this time and money for this credential, and to venture away from whatever the next position is that you're supposed to get with it, if you venture off track, you wasted time and money. Most of us understand the notion of sunk cost, but we very rarely practice the understanding that you can't get the time, you can't get the money back. So make the best decision in the moment. And so there was a little bit of that seeped into the equation. My dad's been a Baptist minister for 43 years. And so one thing I kind of pushed back on our conversation a bit. I said, every Sunday in the Mount Olive Baptist Church at about 12:28 p.m., you are telling people that they don't know when they're going to die. And so they need to make a decision about their soul today. Like there is a fierce sense of urgency in Christianity. And I said, Dad, I don't know when the end is for me. So why would I put this off? Because everyone will tell you, oh, you can do that when you retire. And one thing I know is once you get into the rat race of life, it becomes increasingly more difficult for you to opt out. And I didn't want to give myself the chance to be in a position where I didn't have the willpower to get off. So I decided to jump off early.
I love that you're sharing that there's a new avenue that's been created as the perception of the corporate job that takes you all the way to retirement, even if you switch 30 times in your career, that there's now this new avenue that's not just that. And I think this is really common. I want to caveat this is probably most common amongst people like you shared earlier who, have gotten college degrees and been told, okay, we paid for your degree. Now you need to go make sure that it's worth it. What we did was worth it. If you're lucky enough to have your parents pay, and if you're not, you're just trying to pay off your student loans. But there is this new avenue of independent creators which is growing immensely. One of the things you've said a few times is there are moments where you're not asking anymore for permission. And I wonder if you might shed some light on what you believe is going on for people who feel like they need it and what advice that you'd give them.
I think there are several vantage points. If you are single, let's say that you've been through some college, first of all, I teach at the University of Texas. I teach my class right now. I have 200 bubbly freshmen in my course. And I tell them day one that from pre-K to the 12th grade, education has built them to care about the metrics more than the meaning, right? So AP scores, ACT scores, SAT scores, GPAs, what's your ranking? What percentage are you in your graduating class? This is the world in which young people are measured, and all for what? What's the best college that you can get into? What is the school that's going to wow the most number of people when you tell them that you are here? And then what happens? Well, you go to college and you pick a major, and then if you're the typical American, you run up so much debt such that you need to go to a place in which you can cover your debt service, which tends to be corporate America. And once you get to corporate America, OKRs and KPIs, it never ends. It never ends. So you've been primed for this. And really, I've always believed in this kind of collusive nature between corporate America and higher ed, such that this has to be the avenue. So if you are thinking about creating something, and listen, I think it's such a beautiful struggle for the person who is doing this thing, maybe on the side, maybe they're drawing or they're doing music. I have one of my students who does like knitting for animals. Like she will make these custom made We don't have any pets. Well, we have a hamster that I ignore here, but
She doesn't make sweaters for hamsters.
she doesn't make sweaters for hamsters, right? But I looked at her Shopify site and she showed me some receipts and she's generating close to six figures. And she's an engineering major. And she says to me, and this is the refrain that I've heard for 7 years of teaching, you know what, Professor Roberts, my parents sent me here to do X, but I really want to do Y. So the person who is the creator is really going through the struggle of the people around me, especially if they're older than I am, are on the 30-year pension 401k, retirement party, give you a clock that you're never going to use. They're in that mindset and they can't fathom a world in which one can sit in their home and spend 10 hours on Twitch and generate X number of dollars, right? So there's this disconnect. And so it's difficult because we don't want to let people down. I always say, at the end of the day, I am going to die with me. I went to a lot of funerals because my dad was a Baptist minister, and so he would take me with him. And I just was always struck by this real sense of mortality. And when it's over, like you're done. Here's what I know. I would rather be the person who ventured into this creative life because I felt that I needed to and found that it didn't work for me and then ventured back into the typical track. I'd rather be that person than the one who sits on the conveyor belt and thinks and tries to make that next move, but doesn't. That's the life I want to live. I know it's difficult.
Mm.
And so I think for people who maybe have children or significant others, I mean, listen, mortgages and private school tuition and keeping up with the neighbors across the street who just got the latest Tesla. I mean, this whole consumption game also puts another layer of pressure because each layer provides a little less latitude to make a move from a numbers perspective. So I know the struggle is real.
I very much resonate with that. In my own experience, I did that already. And then when I realized that I was putting, you talk about how higher ed and corporate America are sort of in line, right? Like just replace metrics with job title over meaning, right? Like, it's like that's where I was headed was, what titles can I get? How far can I go? And how much success can I have? And then went, wait a minute, none of this has any meaning. And so I had to let go of a lot of these things, a lot of these games I was playing around consumption. And it was really hard. But I will say I was happier in my couple years of really releasing that than I'd ever been in my, first 7 years in corporate America, just pushing for better and better titles and more money.
Yeah, the longer you live on this planet, the one thing you start to realize is that titles make for very poor traveling companions. At every pivot, at every left turn, right turn, there's always this nagging feeling, well, if I can just get this position, if I could just become VP of marketing, if I could just become head coach, I just become X, then all of my worries will go away. And as the great philosopher, the notorious B.I.G. said, more money, more problems.
But seriously,
people say, oh, well, you can say that. And this works all the way up the economic ladder. With each rung, a different set of problems arrive. And I always say, listen, at least if I'm going to welcome more problems, I want to welcome them doing something that I love.
That's right.
If the problems are going to be, if those are a constant in the equation of life, you want them to be ones that you have helped to manufacture and are actually happy, right? The craft makes you happy. You got me going, Leah. I want to say this too. We don't need as much as we think we need. Oftentimes, that's the very thing that's holding you back from the pivot.
When we get back, Daron explains how the exercise in vulnerability he uses with his students can help you level up. That's after break. And we're back with Daron K. Roberts. As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about a few things. You talk a lot about staying in the deep end has been your hashtag. And part of what this show is about is exploring the vulnerable aspects of the human experience, right? So inspiring transformation, but really being honest about the tough things that happen. And so we're talking about some of these tough things. What does staying in the deep end mean for you, and what do you want it to mean for other people?
Yeah, when I think about staying in the deep end, what it means is embracing just enough personal discomfort that you feel challenged at doing your craft. So I always tell my students, listen, if you apply for a job and you can check off every box in terms of prerequisites, this is not the right job for you. You need to, as soon as you hit the submit button, think to yourself, I'm not sure if they're going to buy it. I have some of the skills, but there are some that I need to, I need to level up on, because those environments are the ones where we learn because we're forced to learn, right? Staying in the deep end means creating before you have an audience. How many writers out there will we never get a chance to consume because, what I call the self-defeating stories, those narratives that play in your mind while you're writing the short story or trying to put the lyrics to music, they can really drown out. And I'm really, I'm writing my third book, and this is my first sort of venture into fiction. And at 3:45 in the morning, when I get up and write, I can hear those voices in the back, like, fiction isn't what you do. This character isn't really exciting, right? So that's why whenever a creator walks out of their cave and brings something to the public, I just acknowledge the bravery that it takes to show people, hey, this is what I've done, right? This is me.
This is me
It's a
in
very
so many ways.
vulnerable
Yeah.
act, and it's tough to get to the point to where you really feel comfortable doing it. But once you do it, this is the thing, right? It's the gateway drug. Once you do the thing, I'm just convinced that you will find your people. Whatever your thing is, however odd it feels, or people say there's a community for everything on the planet. And even if you get one person that buys the thing or reads the free copy, that's all you need. That's all you need to keep going.
And I'll add too, because I'm also a writer and I get this feeling of the vulnerability every time, every time. But you never know who you're inspiring to embrace their own vulnerability and their own it could not it could be something completely different than writing. They could be going to knit, hamster sweaters. But, they're embracing, like, deep in my heart, this is what I want. And just something about seeing you do this made me realize I'm going to go do it. And that is also such a deep experience of fulfillment and a moment to go, wow, like each of us are so powerful.
Yes, and even with the grammatical errors and the mismatch patterns and the seams that don't quite, like, this is the thing, is that, the older I get, the more spiritual I become and the less religious I am. But I think about this notion of, like, this creator and, like, how there's some there's some residue of creation on all of us. And so we're actually, I believe, we're born to create in some way. And the empowerment that we have of just showing people this thing, whatever it may be. I would just say, for the listeners out there, whether you're on the subway or riding a horse in East Texas, bring this thing to life. After you do it once, and sometimes there'll be crickets and you're like, oh man, that was tough. But it's a gateway drug. You won't be able to stop.
Daron, when you talk about spirituality, you brought me back to Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. And when she wrote The Gifts, she had done a number of different, research kind of projects around how we embrace life in a really vulnerable way. And one of the things she came up with was a new definition of spirituality that shifted how I looked at it. And actually, not even shifted, I read it and it felt like coming home. This is her definition from the research. So it's not hers, it's people's. Spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. Practicing spirituality brings a sense of perspective, meaning, and purpose to our lives. And she goes on to say that, people said they found their spirituality the same level in a fishing hole as in a church, as on a
Yeah.
trail, as reading a book.
I do believe that the creator taps into something. I mean, look, I'm thinking through the perspective of a creator. It is a solitary craft. Even when we're working in groups, right? Let's say like a band, for example. but it's a solitary craft to put something together that didn't exist 3 seconds ago. And it comes out of you, whether it's through your pen, keyboard, whatever it may be. And so tapping into that, but then also recognizing that by virtue of creation, you are manufacturing another tool with which humanity can connect with you. It bears the spirit of who you are. And we all crave connection, the arts, music. And this is why it has an eternal grip on people because it's someone's residue. And I think oftentimes creators kind of it becomes a derisive term, like, oh, okay, so you're trying to be Gary Vee or like pump out 25 posts a day and have a funnel that leads to XYZ. And I really wanted to take it back to a very raw form, like this making of something for the sake of making it, because you can't, I'm going to use a double negative that my 12th grade English teacher would not condone. You can't not make it. James McBride, one of my favorite authors, talks about how these characters just invade his body. Like they won't leave him alone until he puts them into the form of a book. And I think if we sit and listen and kind of take our emotional and our spiritual temperature more, we'll find that there are other things that want to get out.
So you teach a course at UT called Game Plan for Winning at Life. What do we have to know about that course? I don't want to spoil it for your students or for people who are thinking about going to UT or can't wait to get into your class. But what do we have to know about that you and I haven't talked about already?
When I returned to Austin in 2014, I'd just been fired from the Cleveland Browns, and I reached out and the dean said, "Hey, we'd love to have you come teach a course." I sat in my office and I asked myself, what are the things that I wish I had learned as an undergraduate that I didn't? And things like vulnerability and empathy, self-care, implicit bias, resilience, failure management, financial literacy. That was on my list. And I thought, man, this is a hodgepodge of stuff. But you know what? This is one of those times in my life where I'm not going to take someone else's template or syllabus. I'm just going to craft this the way I want it. Again, this creator, so I'm kind of rolling the syllabus out and like showing it to students. Like, I don't know if you're going to be into this stuff, but I'm into it. And now it's one of the most sought after classes at UT. We have a waiting list every semester. I have 200 students. It was capped at 200.
I'm giving you snaps.
Oh, thank you. Yes, pray for me to whomever you subscribe. 200 freshmen. I love them all, but I'm definitely earning my paltry check as a lecturer. But we just dive deep into the research. But then each one of those concepts, we have a practice. So with rejection, I send them out into the world in pairs, and they have to ask for something. Ask for a free drink at Starbucks. Ask a stranger for $5, and their partner videotapes them, and then we watch it together. And we talk about the anxiety right before you make the ask, the eye contact. How could we have made the conversation longer? So everything has a practice. Vulnerability, I have them walk across campus in pairs. One of them is blindfolded, and they have to be led by the other, and then they switch roles. And we talk about what that feels like. I'd tell you this is the stuff that makes life go. One thing I found out, you can always find someone to build a spreadsheet. You can always find someone to run the numbers and do your taxes. Like, I think we get so quant and metric driven that we put such a primacy on those areas of study. But when you're having a breakdown at the age of 29 because you didn't get the promotion, those things they're not the bridge to the next part of your life. And so that's what I choose to spend my time focusing on.
I love it. I mean, the fact that you have a wait list tells me people want it. What do you see happens when they leave? What's different about them?
So I have people who are out there in the world doing things, graduates now. And I will get emails from students who said, "Hey, I just got my first rejection. I didn't get the promotion that I wanted, but I remembered the Kristen Neff article on self-compassion and I'm going through the exercises." Or I had a student who was fortunate enough to make it to the pros, and he's in the NFL. And so one of the things that I do with some of the athletes in the course is I talk about having the difficult conversations now rather than later. And so they have to talk with their parents as freshmen about what their expectations will be around their first contract if they make it. And so he is actually, I know this is always going to be, it's an exercise for all the athletes. 1% of them will make it. He was in the 1%. And he said, I remember when I went home during the Christmas break and I had to talk to my mom about the fact that I wasn't going to buy her a home with my first contract, but my hope was the second contract, I was going to save enough to help her on the down payment until the second contract. And he said, now I just signed my first contract. And there's such relief because we have an understanding of what my vision was for what I would do with it. And those are the kind of things, those don't show up on, there's no metric, there's no US News and World Report ranking or indicator for it. But I have a treasure trove of letters and emails that every time I get one of them, I have to remind myself to email the dean and say, okay, I know I said I wasn't teaching next semester, but I'm going to do it again. They keep me going.
Hats off to you, and whatever other way I can say wow, because you actually are helping people become better humans with these things that we've called soft skills, but they're really, I call them human skills. Like, these are just how we show up, like how we show up for our lives. And it's the stuff, if you're super fortunate, you might have an influential adult in your life somewhere when you're young that starts to teach you, but we all need serious reinforcement in that area. So, thank you for doing the work that you're doing because you're making better humans.
That means so much. Thank you.
All right, Daron. So finish these 3 statements. Better humans are.
Better humans are authentic.
Better work is.
Crafted by the worker.
And a better world has.
More people who are willing to get it wrong.
Thank you so much for joining us.
This was incredible. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. That was Daron K. Roberts, founding director of the Center for Sports Leadership and Innovation at the University of Texas and top voice in sports. One big thing before we go. The deep end is not about living some crazy life that's not you. It's about envisioning who you really want to be and choosing to expand into that, taking up the space that you're meant to. So figure out what your deep end is today and take a swim. Don't forget to follow Daron on LinkedIn for more weekly inspiration. If today's episode made you feel inspired and even a little braver, leave us a rating before you go. And more helpful, write a quick review. It helps other listeners like you find this show and grow with our community. And you can always find me on LinkedIn writing about human potential and meaningful living. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Alexis Ramdow. Our associate producer is Rafa Fariha. Asaf Gedron is our sound engineer. He makes sure we sound good in the studio. Joe DeGiorgi mixed our show. Enrique Montalvo is the executive producer of LinkedIn Editorial Productions. Dave Pond is head of news production. Courtney Koop is head of LinkedIn Original Audio and Video. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.